Well, here we are back from break. I hope you had something good to eat and took as long as you needed. I'm here in the chapel at Concordia Lutheran Seminary. We use the chapel regularly, not only for our worship, which it is very much a part of our life and our rhythm, but it's also a teaching chapel where students cut their teeth, so to speak, where they learn about leading worship, where they preach some of their first sermons, and where they are formed as servants for Jesus' sake. We gather with both foci as we work here. But the chapel also reminds us that we don't worship the Bible. We worship God. We thank God for the Bible, but the Bible is the way, one of the tools that God uses to give us His message of love and care. In the chapel, the Bible is a central part of what we do, but it's really the cross and the altar and the lectern or pulpit where the word is preached that becomes the central focus. And here we're reminded in our beautiful architecture here, the major cross and then the crucifix minor cross of Christ. It is Christ who is our Savior. Christ who is the Word made flesh. Christ who is the centerpiece of everything in Scripture and part of the lens through which we read and study and rejoice in the message of God's love for us in His Scripture. And so as we wrap up this final session with Dr. Kloa, we're reminded that all of this is great, how God has used people and the museum and teachers like Dr. Kloa and pastors, local pastors and parents who read Bible stories. And over the years of history, God has preserved His remnant through the use of His Word. But it really is Jesus Christ who is our focus, our center, who is our Lord and Savior, whom we worship and praise each day. And I'm looking forward to this final session, not because it's the final one. I could sit in on these sessions forever, I think, but I'm looking forward to this and how it wraps up. But don't forget, after the session, this session, we're going to have another link, and you can join that for a live conversation between Dr. Kloa and me, and possibly some others who might be willing to join us in that link. It will be by invitation to get into the Facebook session, but it will also be live streamed as well. At any rate, let's get into the second segment of tonight's session. Dr. Kloa, take it away.
So modern translations. And if you need to go to bed, fine, make sure you get this point. Today, in our generation, we are remarkably blessed by very excellent translations. Basically, you cannot buy a bad translation. Unless you get a Jehovah's Witness Bible or something like that. Well, pretend I didn't say that. But if you go to Amazon or you go to a bookstore, if they still exist, and buy a translation, you can use it, trust it, rely on it. They are remarkably well done. We've been working with the Bible in English for 500 years now, and these are excellent translations done by very competent people with a solid foundation in the Greek and the Hebrew and in the manuscripts, and these are excellent. You have translations produced for a range of readers, so you're going to get differences in approach, but I have no issue using ESV, NIV, even King James. I just like the way it sounds sometimes. Christmas time, you cannot not read the King James, right? In those days, the decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed, right? Or, she wrapped him in swaddling clothes and laid him in a manger. You don't see swaddling clothes in modern translations, so it's kind of not really Christmas, right? But that's me. I grew up with that kind of style, and for somebody who's a brand new Christian or going through confirmation class, it might not make sense to talk about swaddling clothes. Okay, give them an NIV or another translation. Point is, they're all remarkably accurate translations. So, how did we get here? And I want to give you just a little history because we're Lutherans, and Luther's a big part of the story. In fact, Luther pretty much defined how we receive the Bible today in terms of its style and approach. So Luther, I'm going to skip over this really quickly. He wasn't the first to do a German translation. There were 18 prior to him. His just happened to be, the best. It just was. He did an excellent job, good scholar, and understood the German language and how to communicate. And between 1522, his New Testament, and 1534, when he completed the whole Bible, there were dozens of other translations. But Luther pretty much just took the world over. Entire German-speaking world ended up using Luther's Bible. And still today, that's the foundation of not only the German Bible, but in many ways, the foundation of the German language. It's pretty remarkable how influential Luther was. Again, he produced this in 1522, first published in Wittenberg with a very fancy title page. You might know this story. This is in the midst of his being threatened with excommunication. The papal bull urging Luther to recant in June of 1520. In January 1521, the bull of excommunication. Luther famously burns the bull in Wittenberg. You have the Diet of Worms, and famously, I cannot and will not recant anything, for to go against conscience is neither right nor safe, right? Unless I'm convinced by scripture and plain reason, I'm not going to change my mind. This occurred at the Diet of Worms in Germany in 1522. And if you go there today, I got a chance to go there about 4 or 5 years ago. That's what you'll see. Here stood before emperor and kingdom, emperor and empire would be a good way in English to say it. Martin Luther, 1521, right? Here I stand, I can do no other. Well, he was in trouble. They whisked him off and put him in hiding at the Wartburg Castle. And so from May of 1521 to March of 1522, kind of a remarkably short time, right? About 10 months. He was at the Wartburg. He started the translation in December and finished in February of 1522, 11 weeks to translate the New Testament. Amazing, amazing feat, actually, especially for the results. If I did anything in 11 weeks, just amazing. Yeah, here's Luther's quote about this Bible. This German Bible, and he says, this is not praise for myself, but the work praises itself, is so good and precious that it's better than all other versions, Greek and Latin, and one can find more in it than all the commentaries. For we are removing impediments and difficulties so that other people may read it without hindrance. I'm only concerned that there won't be much reading in the Bible, for many people are tired of it and nobody clamors for it anymore. So this is 1534, and Luther's already worried that people are tired of reading the Bible. Imagine what he would say 500 years later, right? He just wants people to read. And so that's his translation approach. He wants a readable Bible. And so, for example, he would translate what it means, not necessarily what the Greek would be rendered in a literal translation. So, famous passage for which Luther was criticized is Romans 3:28. In English, it'd be something like this. So now we hold that a person is justified without the works of the law by faith alone. And that word alone occurs in the German, but does not occur in the Greek, in the Latin, or in any manuscript ever. But Luther put the alone, and he got criticized. And here's what he said. Well, you see the King James. King James doesn't include the alone. Here's what Luther said. He said, I know very well that the word solum, that's the Latin word for alone, is not in the Greek or the Latin text. The papists did not have to teach me that. It is a fact that these 4 letters, S-O-L-A, are not there. And these blockheads stare at them like cows at a new gate. I love that. At the same time, they do not see that it conveys the sense of the text. It belongs there if the translation is to be clear and vigorous. It is the nature of the German language to add the word allein in order that the word nicht or kein may be clearer and more complete. Actually, the text itself and the meaning of St. Paul urgently require and demand it. For in that very passage, he is dealing with the main point of Christian teaching, namely that we are justified by faith in Christ without any works of the law. So Luther argues that the way German works, and to be emphatic, the way Paul was being in Greek, is to add the allein, to add the only. So he wasn't that concerned about a literal translation. He wanted a translation that communicated the text so that the meaning of the text could be understood by his German speaking audience. Now, that's kind of revolutionary. As you recall from previous sessions, we looked at, say, Wycliffe's translation, or I guess we didn't get into detail on the Latin or others, but sometimes those weren't really clear to the original audience. Rather, they were really trying to stick to the Greek text or the Latin text. But Luther wanted a text that communicated. Well, I'll read through this. On the other hand, I have not just gone ahead anyway and disregarded altogether the exact wording of the original. Rather, with my helpers, I've been very careful to see that where everything turns on a single passage, I have kept to the original quite literally and have not lightly departed from it. But I preferred to do violence to the German language rather than to depart from the word. Translating is not every man's skill, as the mad saints imagine. It requires a right, devout, honest, sincere, God-fearing Christian, trained, informed, and experienced heart. Therefore, I hold that no false Christian or factious spirit can be a decent translator. So there's judgment involved in translation. There's trying to make it clear while sticking as close as possible to the Greek and the Hebrew. So Luther had a great style. And the reason I'm going so much into depth in this is because Luther influenced William Tyndale in the first English translation. Tyndale was a Lutheran, by the way. And Tyndale pretty much shaped the English Bible. The King James, in particular in the New Testament, just pretty much runs with William Tyndale. So Luther wanted a vigorous, a clear, a simple translation. He didn't like complication. He didn't want his translation to be only for the academics. He wanted his translation usable by all people. So in John 19, where Pilate shows Jesus to the crowd, right? Idu ha anthropos, right? Behold the man. That's what you get in the King James. It's a very dramatic phrase. In German, it's a little more, see what a man. It's a little more, it's not so ponderous and dramatic in Luther. It's more kind of to the point. We don't have time to get into this, but Luther also was insistent on including imagery in his Bibles. Here you have an image from the book of Revelation, the sword with the 7 lampstands in chapter 1. And again, beautifully colored. It's a beautiful edition in 1534. But Luther understood that people could remember the meaning and the text better with a visual image. And so you have these beautiful illustrations throughout his text. And it was an aid to learning. He wanted people to engage with the Bible, to read the Bible, to remember it, to have hooks into it. And so he did kind of a PowerPoint version of his Bible so that it would be accessible to all people. I regret that we don't do that much anymore. In the 19th century, you had a lot of Bibles with illustrations. Of course, kids' Bibles still do today. But we're very text heavy, and we don't do pictures anymore. Yeah, I don't know. I kind of regret that. The first English New Testament, William Tyndale, 1525, and it's been called a Lutheran New Testament because, well, first of all, Tyndale was Lutheran theologically, even though he was from England. And he quite clearly used Luther's translation as kind of a basis for the renderings in English. In fact, he also used Luther's sequence for the books of the New Testament, which is a little bit different from the sequence that we have today. Don't have time to get into that. But Tyndale was so influenced by Luther that he pretty much did a English version of Luther's Bible, still faithful to the Greek, still clear in English, in fact, beautiful in English, but very much influenced by Luther, both in theory and in actual wording. Now, at the time in England, printing the Bible in English was illegal because the church at the time, Henry VIII, was still Catholic. He didn't behead his wives and split from the church until later. So it was printed in Germany at Cologne and smuggled into England, all destroyed. There's just a handful of fragments in existence at all of the 1525 Tyndale. Again, very closely hewing to Luther. In 1526, he revised it and went back to the Vulgate sequence of the books rather than Luther's sequence. But the text is still very much in the spirit of Luther. Tyndale was ultimately hunted down and martyred for his translation work. Never actually made it back to England. That was the animosity toward his work that still existed 10 years after he completed his work. Awesome translation, and we don't have time to go into this, but let me give you a few of Tyndale's goals and some familiar phrases. He wanted everyday language. He liked to use 1 and 2 syllable words, so it didn't get too complicated. He avoids Latin, although sometimes like concupiscence is just a Latin word in English. Sometimes it's just kind of unavoidable. He wanted to encourage the correct understanding of church structure, so he did not like the word church and instead wanted to use congregation because church, for many people in England at the time, meant the Pope. And he wanted people to understand that the church is actually the congregation. Very much a Lutheran understanding, of course, and there's naturally a relationship between the local church and the universal church. But Tyndale, and this was picked up later in the Geneva Bible, the 1560, which is the one the Pilgrims used when they came over in 1620. Anyway, very much a anti-Catholic approach. And so in English today, we use church and understand that it means lots of different things, lots of different forms of church. In Tyndale's day, he wanted to emphasize that it wasn't only the Pope. And so he used congregation where we would use church. He was among the first people, again, following Luther, to translate prose and poetry in the appropriate style. He didn't just kind of make the Psalms sound like Romans. He translated poetry like poetry, narrative like narrative, and rhetorical text, letters like letters. Some of the beautiful, memorable phrases that we still use today come from Tyndale. So, powers that be, my brother's keeper, the Cain and Abel story, salt of the earth, law unto themselves, Jehovah, right? Tyndale invented, which is just kind of rendering in English the Hebrew letters. He came up with the coinage Jehovah to render the divine name in the Hebrew Bible. Scapegoat from Leviticus. Tyndale kind of made that word up. Atonement, actually invented the word. Tyndale invented the word. So the Bibles we use today are very much influenced by Tyndale. And I wish we could track through the whole history of how we got from Tyndale to Geneva Bible to the Catholic Bible in English to the King James Bible to the RSV and now to all the translations today. But we just don't have time. Sorry. Some other time. Why do we have so many translations today? Well, a number of reasons, mostly because we're in America and there's a lot of Christians here. and we're a pretty wealthy nation. And I hate to say it, but you can sell Bibles, right? So there's different translations for aimed at longtime readers, new Christians, evangelism. There are different translation goals or approaches to translation that result in different translations. There are different theories of communication that influence how scholars decide to translate. Sometimes, in some cases, there's a different theological framework. That's much less the case today than it was back in the 16th century. Um, uh, Today, most translations are pretty um, free of theological kind of messing around. I mean, there's always things here and there, but they're pretty reliable, and to no way like what we had going on in the kind of the popish debates and the Puritans and the Church of England and all that stuff in the 16th century that King James put an end to with the 1611 King James Bible. And finally, again, the Bible is marketed, right? You get students' Bibles, you get the military Bible, you get the women's Bible, you get the men's Bible, you get the teens' Bible, you get the, all kinds of things. Most of these have essentially the same text that's being translated, but they're packaged and marketed for different audiences because we live in America. You might have heard in sort of previous studies that there's kind of two views of translation. There's formal equivalence and dynamic equivalence. Formal meaning the translation follows the form of the Greek and Hebrew, letter by letter, or word by word, sorry. And dynamic equivalence meaning trying to catch the dynamism of the text or the spirit of the text. So translating more phrase by phrase rather than word by word so that it communicates more clearly in English. What's probably a more accurate way to understand the differences among translations is really that translators are simply translating for different target audiences. So you have a more text-based approach or a more reader-oriented approach. That is, some people are very much interested in a translation that is clear, readable, doesn't have a lot of jargon, a word like justification. Ugh, I mean, you and I know what that means, but just the average person. So a translation that would be more reader oriented would try to put justification into a phrase, like made right with God. So now you have a whole phrase for a single Greek word. Other translations are more text oriented. So if there's one Greek word, they're going to put one English word, and they're going to stick to that every time that Greek word occurs, if at all possible. And if it doesn't make perfect sense in English, well, that's okay, because some people just want that as close as possible to the wording, even the phraseology of the Greek and the Hebrew. And that's fine. There's just different approaches, and some aim more in one direction, some in the other. The ESV translation, which again is used at least in the U.S. and the LCMS, mostly most LCMS congregations use the ESV. That's probably a bit more on the text-oriented side. I guess I should go this way, text-oriented side, rather than reader-oriented. It's not the easiest text to read out loud. So if your pastor stumbles over it when he's reading on Sunday morning, it's not necessarily his fault. It's because sometimes they're really trying to stick as close as they can to the Greek and the Hebrew in order to make it intelligible for the average person. Something like the NIV or God's Word to the Nation, something like that, tend to be much more reader oriented. And probably for most younger people or most people who are not familiar with Christianity, who are new to the faith, something like the NIV will probably be more understandable on its own. and require less explanation by somebody else. I do want to make sure we're clear that a translation is pretty challenging work to go from a language and wording that's 2,000 years old, 3,500 years old, and try to make it understandable in a completely different context, in a completely different worldview. Uh, I mean, the differences are just innumerable between our situation and Moses, let's say. And so trying to get exactly into our context what the Hebrew and the Greek is saying is challenging work. And you can go through a billion examples, but I love signs like this, right? It's a Chinese sign, deformed man and place, right? Well, obviously they're trying to translate handicapped person rest area, put that into Chinese, and then bring it back into English. It's like Google Translate, right? You get deformed man and place. It's just crazy, right? And or yeah, here, foot wearing prohibited. That is the wearing of footwear. Here, just you know, put together. So don't wear your feet. And sometimes it's just a different context altogether. I used to, when we lived in England working on my PhD, our girls were small, very small, and they had no end of delight whenever they saw this sign, humped zebra crossing. And I'm saying it the English way or the British way, humped zebra crossing. Well, if you see in the background there, you see the crosswalk, which is on top of a speed bump. Well, in England, they call a crosswalk a zebra crossing because it's striped like a zebra, and it's humped because it's on top of a speed bump. So, so every time we'd come across this sign, our daughters would be like, "Hey, where's the humped zebras?" Right? Well, no, it's just a crosswalk on a speed bump. If you don't know uh, the term humped and zebra and how it's used in England as opposed to America, that's a pretty funny sign. Um, but in England, it's don't even think twice about it. So again, even in English, right? If you don't know the context, it's not going to be entirely clear. And our translations I have done a remarkable job of avoiding the humped zebra crossing problem. Right? We don't really have that problem in translating our Bibles. Now, as much as I like and deeply appreciate the English translations that we have today, there are still things that cannot be translated. And that's why your pastors learn Greek and Hebrew, so they can kind of get that technicolor, right? That high definition of what's going on in the biblical text. And just a few examples. In Greek, uh, many languages, but Greek in particular, the noun and the verb will usually come from the same root. So, dikaiao, dikaisune. In English, over the centuries, we've developed the habit of using justify for the verb, so God justifies, and righteousness for the noun, that is, having been justified, or the state of being justified. Um, Same for faith. In Greek, pistis is faith, and pistoio is believe. Verb, noun, same root. In English, we use faith for the noun and believe for the verb. So just in Romans 4:5, for example, notice what we kind of lose. Here's how it's rendered in English in the ESV. And to the one who does not work but believes in him who justifies the ungodly, his faith is counted as righteousness. Now, what you would never know in English is that the words in blue are the same root word, and the words in red are the same root word, dikao and pistoio. So the resonance and the emphasis that you get in Greek is lost in English because of the way the language in English has developed. Doesn't make it wrong, and you're certainly going to get Paul's point, but you'll miss the emphasis, right? So that kind of high def resolution of the text is in some cases not able to be picked up in English. So, learn Greek. It's good for you. Another kind of high def thing that we lose inevitably in English is that sometimes authors will pick a word that can mean two things that can kind of play off of each other. So in John chapter 3, when Jesus is talking with Nicodemus, he says, "Verily, verily," and this is the King James, "I say unto thee, except a man be born again, he cannot see the kingdom of God." Now, the word translated as born again is a word in Greek, anothen, which could mean either born again or born from above, right? So some translations, like the God's Word translation or the Message or the Beck translation, will translate it as, unless a man is born from above, he cannot see the kingdom of God. Now, Jesus is actually intentionally using that word as a play off each other, right? Nicodemus, of course, thinks, how am I going to enter my mother's womb a second time? And Jesus goes on to say, no, Nicodemus, it's the Spirit who causes you to be born anew, born from above, not born from below. So again, in English, you don't know that Jesus means both as he's working through this. And the English translator has to pick just one because there's no English word that means both again and from above. You just don't have it in English. So you lose that, and that's where your pastor can be helpful. Or a study Bible that will have a note to explain exactly that. One other example. Word plays that occur in the original Greek or Hebrew inevitably cannot be brought into English in the same way. For example, in Isaiah 58, where God is pretty upset, right? Um, the Hebrew has this play on words. So, is such the fast, the tzom that I choose, a day, a yom, for a person to humble himself, right? So, I want a tzom and you're giving me a yom, right? Or will you call this, well, it repeats it at the end of the passage here, Isaiah 58. Will you call this a tzom and a yom acceptable to the Lord? Again, we're getting the meaning fine, but we're kind of not getting, if you'll allow me to say this, the sarcasm. It's kind of God being pretty nasty with the Israelites for their unfaithfulness and not following His will. Again, the meaning is there, but the high def resolution is not quite there. Now, another feature of our modern translations is that the translators and editors have added helps to get us through the text. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, that the Greek and Hebrew manuscripts do not have paragraphs or punctuation or verse divisions, chapter divisions, chapter heading descriptions, anything like that. This is, again, a picture of a manuscript from about the year 200 with a couple little really paragraph marks, but that's about it. And again, there has to be choices. And sometimes it just helps to make the text understandable. A classic example is Ephesians chapter 1, verses 3 through 14. The opening of the letter is one sentence in Greek. That's a very long sentence. English, that's just too long. And so the ESV turns it into four sentences. And they have to kind of change some of the pronouns or add, slight adaptations to get it to make sense in English. And there's nothing wrong with it. It communicates what the Greek is doing. But again, I think there's a reason Paul gives this kind of breathless 11 verses, and you lose just a little bit of that in the English in order to make it digestible. Yeah, maybe it shouldn't be digested completely. Or another one, by way of example, and this is a little more problematic. in chapter 5, the way Greek works is you get participles used an awful lot, way more than in English. So, running, justifying, uh, they Greek will just kind of pile those on in thought units. And it's not very good English or very clear. And so the ESV in Ephesians 5, verses 18 and 24, again, splits this up into sentences and even adds a chapter heading in the middle of a sentence. So, giving thanks always to God the Father for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, comma, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ, period. Then a chapter heading, wives and husbands, new sentence, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. Now, what the Greek actually does is put all that into one sentence, all strung together with participles. So, always giving thanks to God the Father for everything in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another out of reverence for Christ, wives to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. So, again, there's not even a verb submit in the last clause there, wives to your husbands. It's being assumed in Greek from the previous participle, but it's all strung together in one sentence. And I got to be honest, I'm not super happy that they stuck a chapter heading to split a sentence up. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. So again, it's not the end of the world. Just be aware that choices are being made for you. And again, this is where, studying the Bible in a group with your pastor or having a good study Bible to explain this can be really important. Another device that we use in English, which does not occur in Greek and Hebrew, is the use of quotation marks. And again, sometimes it can make a pretty big difference. So in 1 Corinthians 7, the King James says, now concerning the things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Which sounds like Paul is saying, don't touch a woman. Okay. Except he goes on to say, yeah, if you're married, don't withhold yourselves from each other. Go read it for yourselves. What's probably happening here, and in fact, Paul does this several times in 1 Corinthians, he has received a letter from the church in Corinth, and he goes topically through the letter and responds to it. And so he quotes that letter and then responds. So in the ESV and in the NIV, you have quotation marks added. Now, concerning the matters about which you wrote, quote, and I'm quoting you now, it is good for a man not to have sexual relations with a woman. And Paul then goes on to say, actually, you guys are wrong. We're not Gnostics or dualists who think that the physical world is evil, right? God created marriage, husband and wives, one flesh, right? Don't think that you're more holy by being abstinent, by abstaining. Sorry, it's a long night. Um, and again, certainly that's what Paul is intending. We can tell because he does it several times in a letter. It's just that in Greek, they don't use quotation marks, and the King James didn't do it, and so possible to misinterpret that passage. So just to wrap this up, I have on the screen here the page from the Lutheran Study Bible. And again, I really appreciate and think it's very valuable at times to have a study Bible and all the helps and the notes. But I also think we should be aware that that's not the Bible itself. That's somebody's interpretation, somebody's attempt to make it clearer, but it's not what the apostles and the prophets wrote. It's somebody else wrote it. And here we have 1 Corinthians 8 and 9, which is a pretty complicated section because it's dealing with practices in Corinth and in the Greco-Roman world. And so you need a lot of notes to understand the stuff about temple dining rooms and all that. So just be aware that all this stuff in red, somebody made up. Okay, not the Bible, somebody's interpretation of the Bible. In fact, I chose this intentionally because I wrote the notes. So take it for what it's worth. somebody's interpretation. I happen to think it's a good one, but I did it 15 years ago or whenever it was. So um, take it for what it's worth. It's not the Bible. But zoom in, and there's all kinds of, again, useful, helpful things that are not part of the Bible, that are not the apostolic and prophetic writings. So all the chapter headings are interpretations, the dates are interpretations. It's the right date, but it's still an interpretation. The notes to explain translations, all the quotation marks, again, I pointed that out, are all interpretations. All the marginal notes to cross-reference things, those aren't in any manuscripts. All the punctuation is added later. The chapter number is added later. And of course, the page number and the running header was not written by Paul. So in a study Bible, about, I don't know, I'm not going to take a guess as to the percentage. But again, I'm not saying it's not helpful. In fact, I find it very helpful for some things to have a study Bible. Just be aware that it's someone's interpretation. And one thing I would encourage you to do, at least on occasion, is, and I found this very helpful, is these Bibles. I don't have one here with me in this room, but these Bibles that don't have any chapter divisions, don't have any verse numbers, and it's written out kind of more like a novel than, kind of split up the way our modern Bibles are split up. And that encourages you to just read, right? Just read, soak the text in, get the context, maybe get lost, right? Forget that you're only supposed to read 2 chapters today and just kind of keep reading for a while. Again, I don't think I mentioned this in this class, but the Gospel of Mark was almost certainly written to be delivered orally to an audience. And it can be delivered in about 2 hours, which is, length of a movie. It's not that bad. And it's actually very easy to follow and actually pretty powerful if taken as a whole. So again, all this stuff is helpful, but the way it was written, the way it was delivered, and the way it occurred in manuscripts for centuries and centuries is as a whole, simply there for the users to read, to kind of get lost in God's word. So how do you evaluate a translation? Just a couple observations here. First, again, as I pointed out, recognize that translating is extremely difficult. It's impossible to perfectly match the Greek and the Hebrew for the reasons that I listed earlier. Again, it's not that the translations are not remarkably accurate, it's just impossible to catch everything when moving from one language to another. You might get different shades of meaning. The cultural setting is, of course, different. And it's just reality that no translation is perfect, even though, of course, every translation claims to be. It's simply not possible to get everything. And again, that's where a study Bible can be helpful, to explain those places where something is lost in picking a Greek or picking an English word. We do have to recognize, again, that interpretation is always involved in translation. The translator has to decide, should I use one English word or a phrase, and which words? Now, in English, we have a long-standing tradition going back to Tyndale of this familiar language. And so for those of us who grew up in the church, that's very comfortable for us. But that's not necessarily always clear, especially to people who aren't as familiar with the Bible. And so, again, nothing wrong with using any number of wonderful translations that we have available to us today. There are some questions like, language changes. These days, changes very quickly, right? Text, spelling, new words get added. COVID, right? Quarantine, right? Quarantine used to be this remote thing, and now it's like just what we do. So again, language adapts and changes. Should we update the translation every year? I think that's a little bit over the top. But what about every 10 years or 20 years or 30 years? And in fact, the NIV, the ESV does update its translation occasionally. There were some updates done to the ESV. Should have looked it up. I think in 2011, maybe they updated a little bit. And so if you have a brand new ESV translation, this one is about a year old, it's what's in this ESV is different from what's in a Lutheran Study Bible. And again, just a very small handful of places, but they chose to update the language a little bit. The key question really is this: does the translation you use make Christ clear to you? Again, the purpose of the Bible is so that you might believe, as John says, that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. If you read a translation and it doesn't make Christ clear to you, then find a different translation. Right? If it doesn't make sense, if you don't hear about the forgiveness of sins, if you are not grabbed by that gospel, then find another translation, because that's what these words were written for, so that we believe that Jesus is the Christ and that by believing we may have life in his name. Or in John 5, right? You search the scriptures because you think that in them you have eternal life. And it is they that bear witness about me. At the end of the day, that's why we read the Bible, to see Jesus. It's that simple. So, how do you use your Bible? A couple thoughts. I'd encourage you to select two translations. One that's comfortable, clear, understandable. The other one should be perhaps more literal, something like the New American Standard Bible, or something that has study notes that explain translations or difficult terms. And that way you kind of get the best of both. You can kind of see when the translator has to adapt things to make it make sense in English, but then it makes sense in English. And so you can kind of compare and understand when the translation is doing a bit more interpretation rather than a word by word translation. Having both, especially when you're really studying in depth a passage, can be very helpful. Second, I would encourage you to avoid paraphrases, except as commentary. So things like the Message, again, very popular, but very much an interpretation and paraphrase, not really a translation. Again, it can be good for devotional reading, but I would not rely on that as an authoritative source for your study of the Bible. Third, and again, it's not a problem, just be aware, excuse me, that the layout and the notes are shaping your reading. And again, that's why I'd encourage you to find a Bible that doesn't have all that, that you can just read on its own and not be encumbered by somebody else's interpretation, not get distracted by something that in the big picture is less important. Just read it. Fourth, I think it's very important that we read the Bible with other people. God gave his word through his church, through the apostles and prophets. He calls, gathers, enlightens, and sanctifies the whole Christian church on earth and keeps it with Jesus Christ in the one true faith. And by reading with others, we are able to hear things that someone else picks up on that we miss. And ideally, read with your pastor. I guess that's the later note. Read with someone who knows the Greek and the Hebrew and can walk you through some of those challenges and give you a little bit more of that kind of high def, full color resolution on the translation. Fifth, read it in large chunks. Just read chapters at a time. Read a book at a time. Tomorrow morning, just read Philippians. It's not very long. It'll take you about 20 minutes. It's a beautiful, encouraging, positive book. Just read it. It's not that hard. Romans, a little more work, but take Romans in 3 chunks. Read 1 through 8, read 9 through 11, and then read 12 through 16. 3 days, and you got Romans covered. All right, just read it. Again, a Bible study with notes or Bible with study notes can be helpful, but again, recognize that the notes will reflect the theological bias of the authors. And just speaking as a note writer myself, some of the notes will be wrong. Those are written by fallible humans and reflect whatever the publisher wants at that time and the abilities of the author. Doesn't make them wrong, doesn't make them unhelpful. Just understand them for what they are. All right. The key point, just to make sure we got this, read your Bible. Just read it. It's a remarkable gift that in our generation, this is so accessible, available in so many formats, that is so clear and adapted exactly for us. We have riches and resources of the Bible that no generation previously has had. So just read it. That's what it's for. That's why you bought it. That's why your parents gave it to you, or your husband or your wife. They gave it to you so you would know Christ. So just read it. Just in case you don't want to believe me, here's Luther. You should diligently learn the Word of God, and by no means imagine that you know it. Let him who is able to read take a psalm in the morning or some other chapter of Scripture and study it for a while. This is what I do. When I get up in the morning, I pray and recite the Ten Commandments, the Creed, and the Lord's Prayer with the children, adding any one of the Psalms. I do this only to keep myself well acquainted with these matters, and I do not want to let the mildew of the notion grow that I know them well enough. The devil is a greater rascal than you think he is. You do as yet not know what sort of fellow he is and what a desperate rogue you are. His definite design is to get you tired of the word, and in this way to draw you away from it. This is his aim. Right? Luther couches this in spiritual warfare terms. It is necessary that this formative word of God continue to shape and form us. I guarantee you that if you have not read the book of Philippians in 10 years or 5 years or even a year, you will see and hear, and different things will stick out to you today than they did the last time you read it. It's because God's word is powerful. And we, as sinful human beings, are different day to day. We face different challenges. We face different opportunities. Yet the word of God is enduring, and it speaks to us wherever we are. So pick it up and read it. Again, as Luther says, don't think you know it. And I'll wrap up with what's just my favorite prayer. This was written by Thomas Cranmer, English archbishop who did most of the Book of Common Prayer, which became the foundation of English hymnals, including Lutheran hymnals, early on in the 20th century. And he has this gorgeous prayer, originally written for the second Sunday of Advent. Now we call it the Collect for the Word. But I invite you to just close with this prayer with me. Blessed Lord, who has caused all holy scriptures to be written for our learning, grant that we may in such wise hear them, read, mark, learn, and inwardly digest them, that by patience and comfort of thy holy word, we may embrace and ever hold fast the blessed hope of everlasting life. Amen. Thanks for joining me. Blessings on your study of the Word.
Thank you for being with us again through this second segment, but we're not quite done yet. There's bonus time after this, and I hope you can join us. You'll exit this, it'll end, and then pick up the new link that will allow you to join us for the what is going to be a living, real-time conversation between Dr. Clough and me, and I'll ask a couple questions that have been forwarded to me. I look forward to that time, and as you can tell, we haven't had that time yet, so I don't know what it's all going to mean, neither do you, but I think it'll be exciting. And again, thank you for joining us, and for your support. Without your support, without your partnership, your prayers, you sending us prospective students as deacon or pastoral candidates, we wouldn't have a reason to exist. We wouldn't be able to fulfill our mission. And thank you also for your financial support that allows us to provide this to you at no cost. Feel free to use these if you want for Bible studies in your small group or in your church. We want it to be available for use to you. We think it's of great benefit. Anyway, we're going to close for now and see you in just a few minutes.